So a while back, somebody made a comment saying something about me making a cooking video, and I figured, what the heck, let's make a cooking video. So I'm going to show you a recipe for a pot roast that I actually developed from a friend of mine's mom a long time ago whenever I was pretty young. Used to make this great pot roast, so this is based on her recipe, and so it's very simple and easy to make. So what I've got here is about 3 pounds of chuck that I have chunked up into pretty large squares and have seared on each side. It's not super important that you do that, but I like to do it. Sometimes I'll often grill it to give it just a touch of smokiness to the final flavor. Again, it's not super important. If you don't do that, it will come out really good. It doesn't really matter. I've made it without searing a ton of times. If you're in a hurry, just don't worry about it, right? You don't even have to cut it up. Just leave the whole thing whole. Put it in there, it'll be fine. Other major ingredients, I've got 2 pounds of red potatoes. You can use Yukon Gold, you can use fingerling potatoes. If you use fingerlings, you don't even have to chop them up. I like to get them into decent cubes, maybe inch cubes, 3/4 inch cubes. Again, not super strict. You just cut them up. That's really the point, so that you don't have just giant potatoes. I've got a large onion. You can use white onion. You can use yellow onion. Sweet, it doesn't matter. And I've just cut that into big wedges. You don't have to dice it. As a matter of fact, the choice here on how rough you chop stuff is mostly what kind of textures you want at the end. Carrots, I don't even buy whole carrots anymore. I just get the little baby carrots. You want 2 pounds of carrots. I've got a little bouquet that you don't really have to have, but this is just rosemary, thyme, and oregano that I grow. I had it, so I figured I'd toss that in there. I've got a pretty good amount of garlic that I have rough chopped, and by rough chopped, I mean I get it to maybe 1/4 inch and under pieces. Again, not super important. The choice about how rough to chop your garlic is basically, do you like bits of garlic or do you just want garlic flavor? I like sometimes having bits of garlic, so I go pretty rough on that chop. By the way I do my garlic, I peel out the cloves, I chop off the root end, and then I smash them with a flat knife. Just be careful around your fingers. But if you do that, the clove pops out pretty easily, and you don't really have to fiddle with peeling garlic. Other major ingredients, you've got cream of mushroom soup. Feel free to get store brand. It really doesn't make any difference at all. And then I've got some beef bouillon. You also want some olive oil, some salt and pepper. And, you know, if you like, a lot of times, I will also throw in maybe a good tablespoon maybe of cumin, right? Ground cumin. And so that's all you need. Fairly rustic, but it turns out really well. So let's bring out the star of the show. All right, so we've got a big crock pot. This is a 6.5 quart. So it's a pretty large crock pot. This recipe will fill this thing up. So if you're using a smaller crock pot, you want to reduce probably the size of everything kind of proportionally. So this is a 6.5 quart, and it's going to be full by the time we get done. So the first thing, I tend to put some olive oil in the bottom, make sure that it's covered. It's not a huge thing. I just put the olive oil in there mostly to just keep stuff from sticking as bad, but it's really not super important. So next up, I put half of the roast in the pot, and now I'm just going to start layering in ingredients. So I'm going to add about half of the vegetables in this layer. Again, you don't have to be careful here. It's gonna all cook down anyway. Okay, next up, I'm going to do another little drizzle of olive oil, then salt and pepper. Pretty good amount of salt and pepper here. Don't be scared of it, because remember, you've got 6 pounds of ingredients, so on the pepper, it's usually not too much. I do a pretty good amount. On salt, you know, if you want to back off, that's okay. You can salt after cooking, but a decent amount of salt probably going to be required. But again, if you're scared of doing too much, because it is, to me, salt's the one thing that it is kind of easy sometimes to get too much of, just go a little light on it. Because, I mean, you can always, again, add more later with the salt. That's no problem. Okay, next up, I am going to add some cumin. Again, on this, it's kind of a preference whether you want it or not. It adds a bit of savoriness, I find, to this that I like. And next up, garlic. Now, I have pretty good amount of garlic. I think this is 5 or 6 cloves that I have chopped up. So I'm going to do about half of it here in this layer. You know, as far as how much garlic, that's personal taste. To me, it's really hard to get too much garlic, so I usually go pretty heavy on it. Okay, now next up, I'm going to do some beef bouillon. So just like a cube of beef bouillon is fine. That's usually what I use. But I was told recently by somebody to try this better than bouillon stuff. So I'm going to give it a shot. And it basically says 1 teaspoon is equal to 1 bouillon cube. So I'm going to do 1 teaspoon of this and just kind of drizzle it through the middle. I usually try to get stuff spread around at this stage because it is just going to sit and cook. But it will pretty much flow together, so that's not a huge problem. All right, then the last thing, open up the can of cream of mushroom soup, and same spoon here. I'm just gonna, again, just try to add this around evenly. It's not super important that you smooth it or anything, but I do try to just spread it around so that as everything cooks, it's just gonna evenly kind of soak into everything. Okay, so now the home stretch, just put in the remaining beef and your remaining vegetables. Like I said, it is going to fill this pot. I'm actually going to throw this bouquet and kind of bury it in there a little bit. All right, so like I said, it's a full pot. Now, what's left is just to season. So the remainder of my garlic, a little bit more olive oil, then salt and pepper. Again, kind of to taste, but I do fairly heavy pepper, not so heavy on the salt. All right, if you want more cumin, you can add more cumin. I think I'm good with what I've already got in there. Again, it's more of an enhancer than anything. So at this point, it's done except for the cooking. So I'm just going to slap the lid on it. And then I'm going to turn this thing to high. And once it's kind of going, I turn it back down to low. And if you're cooking it on high, it will obviously go faster. You might check it after 4 hours to see how it's going if you're doing it on high. If you're doing it on low, probably 6 to 8 hours. And it has not been uncommon for me to leave this thing sitting 10 hours. Now, at 10 hours, it's going to be really, really soft. But it's a pretty nice meal because you can prep it like this. And actually, you can just pull, if you got one of your crock pots, you know, pull it out, put that in the fridge, and then pull it out later. And like before I go to bed, sometimes I will throw this on. And when I wake up in the morning, it's done. If I start it off on low, it'll cook overnight and it'll be great. So since it's during the middle of the day, I'm going to throw this thing on high to get it going. And then I'm going to throw it to low once it's kind of going pretty good. And it'll probably be done by the time I go to bed. Because the other thing, the last piece of advice, I think it tastes better after it sits. So typically I'll cook it, I'll let it sit for overnight or close to a day before I eat it. So that's, again, my standard recipe is I'll do this, I'll put it on before I go to bed, I'll wake up, it'll be done, I'll put it in the fridge, and then that night it will have rested and it'll be absolutely fantastic. But let's throw it on to cook and I'll come back once it's done. All right, I think we're done. I started about halfway through just to kind of rotate everything. The vegetables that were on the top tend to cook a little slower because they're not in the liquid. You can see you don't have to add liquid. All of the vegetables and everything produce enough liquid during the cooking process with the meat, you know, releasing and kind of cooking down its fat rendering and stuff like that. So it's turned out pretty well. The meat's certainly tender and pulls apart pretty easy. Now, if you want it to be a little less cooked, you want a little bit more texture, you don't have to go this far with it. Let's get a little taste test here. Pretty good. Potatoes, the bigger chunks, just check to see that they're cooked all the way through. Fork goes into them, no problem. So everything's cooked. I think I maybe could have done a little bit more salt, but you know, you can always add salt later. So I'm going to turn this off and just let it cool down a little bit, and then I'm going to throw it into the refrigerator overnight. Because like I said, I do prefer it after it sits. for a while and cools off and then reheats, it seems like all the flavors come together a little bit better. But that's it. That's all there is to it. You just throw it all in there and it cooks and it's done. So, throw it in a bowl later and see how it tastes. Well, there you have it. Pretty easy, straightforward pot roast. It's been actually a couple days. One of the nice things about this is it does keep pretty well in the fridge. It reheats really, really well. Was able to take some over last night, had supper with friends. I also baked a nice loaf of crusty bread, which I strongly recommend to pair with your pot roast if you ever make this. Goes really, really well with a good piece of bread. So anyway, I'm about to have lunch. So if you ever make this, please let me know what you think about it. Again, it's a straightforward, simple recipe. It's nothing more than meat and root vegetables, but turns out pretty well. It's very simple, very easy. So anyway, that's all I got for this video. Hope you enjoy. Thanks.